as faculty who are currently into online distance or modular learning. So the first part, for the first part, our speaker, Dr. Maha Leia V. Ravago, is an associate professor at the Department of Economics, Ateneo de Manila University. Her research interests include energy, economics, economics of natural disasters, development economics, and resource economics. She is also currently a research fellow at the Research Institute for Environmental Economics and Management, RIEEM, in Waseda University, Japan. She was the program director of the 2014 to 2018 USAID grant on Energy Policy and Development Program, or EPDP. She served as the president of the Philippine Economic Society, or PES, in 2018. She received the 1 UP Faculty Grant Award in Economics for Outstanding Research and Public Service in UP Diliman from 2016 to 2018, when she was the assistant professor at the UP. In 2016, she was awarded the Outstanding Young Scientist in the field of economics by the National Academy of Science and Technology, or NAST. She earned her BS in Business Economics and MA in Economics from the University of the Philippines. She obtained her PhD in Economics from the University of Hawaii in 2012 under the East-West Center Graduate Degree Fellowship Program. Ladies and gentlemen, to discuss Policy Brief 101, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Professor Maha Leia V. Ravago, with a round of virtual applause. Dr. Professor Maha Ravago, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen so we can start. Do you see it?
Yes,
yes, ma'am.
Yes, it can be seen now.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Good afternoon, magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. This time, maybe some of you are doing their siesta, so I hope I keep you interesting. Before we start, I'd like to thank the National Research Council of the Philippines Division 1 for this invitation, led by the chair, Dr. Maripaz Morales, for this opportunity to share with you our experience on research engagement and dissemination. Specifically, I will be talking about the case of Philippine electricity policy. While I will be focusing the discussion on policy brief or 19 policy brief, I will also put it in the bigger context of the engagement and dissemination. Okay, so I guess some of you already have an idea what is a policy brief, but just to keep all of us on the same page, a policy brief is primarily aimed at policymakers and to a broader audience. So this is what differentiates a policy brief from our academic paper, no? So our academic paper, it's aimed at our peers, specialized audience, whereas a policy brief, this is for a broader audience and most especially to the policymakers. So in this sense, it's somewhat similar to a paper produced by somebody who are lobbying for something, okay? But the difference is it's also a tool for providing evidence-based policy advice. And in this policy brief, when you're writing a policy brief, you're communicating your research findings in plain language, and it has to show clear policy implication. So these 2 points differ a policy brief from a paper produced by somebody who are lobbying, because a lobbyist would like to advance a particular interest for a special group, whereas a policy brief, it's for the benefit of the general public. So if you're in the Philippines, it's for the benefit of the Filipinos. Okay, so when writing a policy brief, it's important to keep in mind these 5 W's and 1 H. Okay, the first W, what do you want to communicate? So this is your main agenda. This is your topic of interest. Why is it important? So you have to so ask yourself, why are you what is the importance of writing this policy brief? And always keep in mind your target audience. So again, because this is a policy brief, you're trying to influence or providing inputs to crafting policies. It's the number one is the policymakers. Then you also have the other stakeholders, which are the government implementing agency, and who are the beneficiaries of the policy that you are trying to influence. And the other W's, when should it be done? Where will it be done or delivered? How it will be done or delivered. So keep this in mind, this question, so that when you write your policy brief, you are also answering some of these questions. Now, the structure of a policy brief, when you write it, it's kind of similar to the usual academic paper. Because a policy brief, you're just distilling the results, okay, or summarizing the results of your academic paper. An academic paper, these are rigorous, you have the scientific method, but you are using your own specialized jargon from our respective discipline. So you have to differentiate your policy brief in a sense that you're talking to a broader audience. So in all my classes, whenever I have an exam or a question, I give an exam or a quiz, I always ask my students to answer a particular question when they are talking to an economist, and then answer the same question when they are talking to their high school sister or brother or even their grandmother. So you're communicating the same thing, but you're using different language because you are talking to different persons. Okay, so usually a policy brief, that's why it's a brief, it should be 2 pages or 4 pages, not 3. Before the pandemic, this is usually printed in a paper. And since you're trying to aim for a policymaker, these are very busy people. So they usually have time to prepare for a meeting on the way to the meeting. So because it's traffic here in Manila, right? They are reading the policy brief on their way to that meeting. So it has to be back to back, so front and back. So that's why it's 2 pages. Or if it's a spread, then it can be 4 pages. Okay, so a two-page document would usually be around 1,000 words, and a 4-page document would be about 2,000 words. It's a challenge because doing the policy brief, because it's a different skill. Okay, sometimes organization may have people doing the layout for you. You provide the content, because it also matters how the brief is presented to the general public. So the structure, typically it contains the summary. So this would just be 1 to 2 paragraph. Then the introduction has to catch the attention, because you're already telling the reader why you are writing this brief, the urgency and importance of the topic that you are discussing in the brief. Then your research overview, so this would be distilled from your own research. So it has to have the research question, the approach, your research approach, your methodology, and the research results. This would be about 2 to 3 paragraphs only. And then you have the discussion and the analysis of your research findings. Again, because this is a policy brief, the findings, okay, the scientific findings has to relate to concrete realities and consequences of potential effects of a policy initiative. Note that in our own discipline, in economics, we have the simplifying assumption, we have the model, right? But when we relax those assumptions, then we are going closer and closer to reality. So this has to be stated in the brief, because you are trying to influence actual policies. And then you can say, if you do this, what would be the consequence? And then you can offer other policy alternatives and what would be the consequences. And then, of course, the conclusion would have to have a policy recommendation, again, because this is a policy brief and you're trying to provide inputs to policy making. Okay, and some things to remember when writing your policy brief, because you have to write it in a plain language, right? And the audience is also to the stakeholders. So we just need to use plain language, and we have to avoid the jargon in our respective discipline. Also, avoid including mathematical equations because that would turn off your readers. And then it's also attractive when there's a visuals, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So you may include graphs, but note that it has to be very easy to interpret, a picture or a table, but very readable. So I have here a map, or this one is a bar graph, so very easy. Okay, very easy to interpret pictures. Going back to the 5 Ws and 1 H. Okay, so I'm going to situate now policy brief in the bigger context. So the question, what you are trying to communicate? You're trying to communicate the practical implication of your research, right? So note that policy brief is an important part of the full spectrum of research. You cannot just write policy brief as a standalone. It has to come from your own research. So here you have to conduct. You have here your research, conducting your research, and then policy brief is part of the. Okay, hold on. Policy brief is part of this dissemination. Policy brief would already be at the tail end of the full spectrum of research when you are disseminating and engaging the stakeholders in your research. I'd like to talk about the project that was mentioned in the introduction. We had this project, Energy Policy and Development Program, or EPDP. This was funded by USAID. It ran from October 2014 to October 2018. At the outset, EPDP supported the national government, in particular NEDA and DOE, in policy analysis and formulation for the energy sector. Its objective is to help strengthen the capacity of the Philippine government in the formulation of coherent and evidence-based policies. Note that it has 4 components: research, communications, capacity building, and policy advisory. But all these 3 is anchored on the research program of the project. So the primary clientele is NEDA and DOE, but we also engage with the legislative branch, mainly the Senate and the lower house. I'm talking about this because we cannot talk about policy brief in a vacuum. So in the span of 4 years, initially, EPDP has established itself as a credible and independent research group. In the course of that 4 years, from for the 4 years of its life, the project was able to produce several research studies, about 27. And then every time we have this the study, we produce working papers and an accompanying policy brief. Working papers, these are the sort of a preprint version before we submit it to a book for publication or to a journal. We already released a working paper accompanying the policy brief, so that when you release your policy brief, people can also look at, if they are interested, of the the write-up or the technical write-up accompanying that policy brief. And then at the end of the project, most of these studies became part of the book, powering the Philippine economy, electricity policy. And then 2 of those studies also became part of this book, which are collection of the thematic papers, background papers for the Ambition Natin 2040. And then we also submitted these papers to a journal. The point is, we were using economics and science research in engaging with stakeholders. It's not just you're engaging with the stakeholders or to the policymakers when you're trying to make an impact. So of course, in doing research, there are knowledge and skills that are needed or important to be successful. One has to have a good grasp of the theoretical foundations of your own respective of your own discipline. So in my case, economics. ability to apply the theories, again, in our own discipline, and concept to answer a policy research question. And of course, the technical know-how regarding empirical research, because we're trying to generate evidence. Okay, evidence because it came from a scientific method, it came from, it's supported by empirical or the numbers that you're trying to support in influencing a particular policy. The key point that I would like to impart is that for greater credibility of your policy brief, it has to be backed up by rigorous research. Because even if you give this, so you're giving this to the policymaker and to the broader audience, a policymaker can always ask their technical staff about what you're saying in that brief. So you always have to be ready with the technical paper. This is your academic paper. And also, policymaker can also ask the other, let's say, in my case, other economists, whether the brief that I'm sending them is really credible. So the policy brief is emphasizing the intuitive message of your research. So you're just giving them something so that they can understand easily the findings of your research. I'd like to give an example, a specific example of a policy question that can be written in a policy brief. So it's better to phrase it in a question so that at the end you would ask yourself, did I answer the question that I am posing? A particular policy question, again, using electricity or energy as an example, should the Philippines adopt a more aggressive posture towards adoption of renewables, or should it be technology neutral? Again, even though I am, the field may be technical, remember, we should be able to communicate to the general public. And these issues and concerns is very much talked about now, especially about the recent conference of parties that just happened. So there's a lot of talk about transition to cleaner energy. Cleaner energy. So maybe you would say that technology neutral may be not as plain. So, but you can still further explain this, saying that a technology neutral policy would be one where you're letting the market, meaning what would be the most competitive cost fuel, because people respond to incentives. So when you try to answer this question, you would have a more technical modeling, but you can explain that it's not enough to calculate which fuel has the lowest average cost. Rather, one would need to solve for which fuels will be used when in a typical day. For example, you can further tell that a coal has the cheapest fuel cost, but it also has the highest plant cost, meaning when you build a coal power plant compared to gas or to any other power plants. So coal in that sense would only be justified when you spread its high fixed cost over many hours, because some people are still saying that it has to be coal because it provides the cheapest electricity. If we remove coal, let's say in the Philippines where it generates about 50% of electricity, then there would be a power crisis in the country. So it's justified because it's still cheapest, but you have to spread the fixed cost. The market would automatically recognize this, except that coal is also the dirtiest fuel because it emits the highest carbon emission relative to other fuel. That's why the concerns for the environment is coming out here. And pollution, this is something that is not recognized by the market because it's not priced. So how do we take this into account? Then what you can say is you can add a pollution cost, and how to do this is to impose a tax on the use of coal and other fuels according to their pollution cost. So this is what the train law has done. They put there's a provision there of putting a coal tax. However, the mistake there is that coal is not the only fuel that's producing carbon. Even natural gas is also producing carbon emission, except that it's lower by about a half or 1/3 than coal. So that natural gas is also tag as a bridge to a cleaner technology. So why can't we just go to a full renewable? Because right now, there is the problem of intermittency with regards to renewable. Intermittency means that the electricity is only generated from solar when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing. So in this case, once the pollution from coal and other fossil fuels are taken into account, you do not need additional subsidy for renewables. Okay, so another key point for when writing a policy brief is that you should not try to promise all the answers at once. This is a common mistake even among graduate students. They try to answer several research questions in one paper. And for us, we're only writing 2-page or 4-page, right? We cannot solve the problems of the world. So at the end, you can offer future avenues for research. So one at a time. So you cannot answer everything. So don't try to promise everything. So continuing on with the example, with the specific example earlier, so that exercise of trying to determine what fuel to use can be carried out for different specification about the amount of solar to see which has the least social cost. When we say social cost, this would already include the cost of pollution and not just the cost of using a particular fuel. And then you can end by saying also that in future research, one can calculate the optimal or the appropriate amount of solar directly by including an explicit cost of intermittency that is managed by fuel diversification and storage. This is a problem with renewable because even though the technology in terms of its development is very fast so that it's becoming really cheap, the storage, the battery, the development with regards to the development of battery, it's not as fast. And so it is still expensive and one has to manage the intermittency problem. Okay, so another example here is a research that we did after EPDP. So this is already on natural gas. So we conducted a survey among the firms in the special eco zones. So we did this project for about a year, and we released a working paper and submitted it to a journal. So it's now already published in Energy Journal. And since we did a survey, we also submitted our data for everyone's use in this journal, Data in Brief. And it has actually yesterday I received a notice that our submission has already been accepted. So before it was published in this journal, as I've said, we wrote a working paper that was released to the public and also to get comments on the study. But accompanying that working paper is we also released a policy brief that we circulated to the policymaker and also to the general audience. And you don't just stop there. If you want to create an impact, from the policy brief, which is about 4 pages, you can further shorten this just to focus on the message, on the core message. And we also put it in as an opinion piece here in the Blue Eagle, published in the column of at Department of Economics in Ateneo. We have this column in Business Mirror called Eagle Watch. And then when the publication was released, and even when the policy brief was already posted in our website, the media picked it up and incorporated them in their stories. So this one is in Business World, and this one is another one in Business Mirror. Okay, so going back again to the 5 Ws and to the 1 H. So why the policy that you're trying to influence is important. So in this case, why did we have that energy policy and development project? Back then, when we were developing the proposal for that project, it was 2016. We thought that it's important to bring to fore the discussion on energy policy because very few academic and policy programs in universities and economic centers exist then to develop and promote knowledge, research, and best practices. So typically the discussion is found among the research, non-government research organizations. So we want to bring it to the academe. And we try to identify who are the stakeholders. In the course of doing the various studies in the project, the team already engages with the various stakeholders. So we already identified at the outset, it will be NEDA and DOE, but as we go through and implement the project, we also engage with the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, with the regulatory agency of the electricity sector, which is Energy Regulatory Commission, with the Philippine Competition Commission, and of course with the Committee on Energy, both at the Senate and the House. And even though we're not done yet with the study, as we are conducting it, we are validating the studies through workshops. And when we are conducting workshops, we're already inviting the stakeholders so that they can already give feedback. I think in that sense, you're already getting the buy-in from the stakeholders that you're trying to influence. So here we have the director from the DOE, commissioner from ERC, researchers from PIDS. So we already engage with them in the course of doing the study. Okay, when it should be done. So this is important. Meaning, when do you engage? When do you release your policy brief? When do you release your studies? When do you engage with your stakeholders? When the lifespan of EPDP from 2014 to 2018, we engage with 3 department secretaries of NEDA and DOE, from Petilia, Monsada to Cusi, from Balisacan at NEDA to Esguera, and then to Secretary Pernia. So we all met with them. Okay, because the danger of having a multi-year project is sometimes we are able to engage and communicate with one secretary, but then when a new secretary comes in, then they would not be listening to you anymore. So that's the danger, okay, with this kind of multi-year project. But in our case, we not only engage with the head of the agency, we also engage from the director level down to the technical staff when we are conducting some training and capacity building, so that when a new secretary comes in or a new head of the agency come in, their staff are already telling them about the group, about our group. So we also engage with, as I've said earlier, with the Committee on Energy, both at the Senate and also at the House. Back then, at the House, it was led by the now Speaker, Lord Velasco. And then we engage with the 2 sets of commissioner at ERC and also at PCC. When Secretary Cusi came in, since their staff has already been, we are engaging also with their technical staff. They introduced us, and Secretary Cusi requested a policy briefing activity to the management. So we had this meeting, so before the DOE management and including its attached agencies. And in this meeting, Secretary Cusi said that this activity, the policy briefing that we did for the DOE, will make us realize the critical importance of partnership between government and the academe in enhancing energy policy development. We at the Department of DOE recognize the privilege of working with EPDP to do just that. Because really, when in the course of our engagement with DOE, they are saying that they are so concerned about the day-to-day operations of the agency that even if they have a research department, it's really sometimes, or more often, it's difficult for them to really focus on doing the research. So partnering with the academe, is also important for them to be in touch with the research and to have a different perspective, because they've been with the government for so long and they needed a fresh take on energy issues and policies. And then again, you cannot take a policy brief in a vacuum. It has to be part of this bigger engagement. So the project conducted several policy forums that provided neutral platforms for discourse on energy issues. In any sector, there may be dynamics because of the various personalities. So this is what we've heard from them, and they really welcome the fact that a policy forum is being organized by somebody from the academe. So it provides really a neutral venue for them to have an exchange that also includes the perspective of the academe. And then how it will be delivered, how it will be done. So we were very fortunate because when we were when we had this project, we had champions. So it's important to have champions, particularly at the highest policy making level, who supports what you're trying to put forward. So in this case, we had the support of the Secretary of NEDA then, who is now the chair of the Philippine Competition Commission, PCC Chairman Arsenio Balisacan, and also the mission director herself of the USAID then. So this was Doria Steele. And then it's important that you focus on what you want to achieve, and you know that you cannot achieve this in just one policy brief. So we were trying to engage with the various policymakers and stakeholders so that we can sustain the gains of the project even beyond its lifespan. We were presenting our research in various fora, and we were able to interact with Senator Gatchalian, and he then invited us to meet and discuss more. And this was our first meeting, and that gave him an idea of creating a think tank, an energy think tank. And after that, we've been always invited to provide inputs on several bills. We provided inputs in this Senate bill, Energy Regulatory Governance. And when Senator Gatchalian initially authored a bill creating this Philippine Energy and Policy Institute Act. So this was in 2017. We were present in all the meetings, from the public hearing up to the technical working group. Then we went to the House in order to also provide inputs and be a resource person. We also provide inputs on the review of EPIRAB. There are 2 House bills back then, 2017 and 2018. This one is a quote from Senator Gatchalian himself in one of the public hearing of the Energy Institute. He said, "This is why nagkaroon kami ng idea to create this institution, which is not unique. Because actually EPDP is already doing the bulk of heavy lifting in terms of research. But alam naman natin that limited lang ang lifespan ng EPDP. This is why the objective here is to institutionalize this institute, giving it a long-term perspective." He relayed to us that when he became the chair of the Committee on Energy at the Senate, he was looking for a turnover of materials but could not find any. So he started from scratch, and he actually did go around when he is on travel in looking at the example of an energy institute. And there are various examples in different countries where there is an accompanying energy institute set up in the academe that provides a different perspective with the research that are being done by the government. So that is what he was trying to emulate. And then, of course, a bill cannot be passed when there's at the Senate when there's no accompanying bill at the House. So there was also a bill at the House of the Representative, and we also attended several of these committee hearings. And finally, early this year in 2021, so it took about 2017 up to 2021 still this is actually very fast. From bills, it now became a law. So it's now an act. So it's the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute Republic Act 11572. And we're very proud to say that the project EPDP was one of the catalysts that inspired Senator Gatchalian to push for the Energy Institute. And right now, the internal rules and regulations are being crafted. So hopefully, this will be up and running early next year. And this is established at the University of the Philippines system. No? So it's attached to the Office of the UP President, but it's not only for UP, it will be nationwide, both in the nationwide, both private and state universities will be included in building this Energy Institute. Okay, so again, putting policy brief in a perspective, you cannot just take it in a vacuum. The credibility of your policy brief stems from responsible research governance, review of peers, and also external recognition. EPDP, because of course it is funded by USAID, we need to have that check and balance. So every month, every quarter, we're submitting a report and we have a performance indicator tracking table, meaning the output, what we are doing is being tracked every quarter and we're submitting that. And it's also important that you are also respected by peers. One way to show that is when you have a publication in international journal, because this one has undergone rigorous peer review. And even the book you cannot publish it because when we publish our book at the UP Press, they have to send it to a reviewer, an external reviewer that's not involved in the project. And in the course of doing that, we also had external recognitions from NAST when I received one of the Outstanding Young Scientist in 2016. And just last year, our book received also this recognition as one of the Outstanding Book Awardees, also recognized by the NAST. And when we launched the book, again, we took that as an opportunity to further engage policymakers when we had the policy forum. And note that when you are doing good research, credible research, and you deliver output, it's relatively easier to raise funds. So EPDP is only for 4 years. So when it ended, we had the sequel, which is the Gas Policy and Development Project. This one is funded by U.S. Department of State. And again, we continue the engagement with the stakeholders, the DOE, the Senate, and also the House. Let me just, again, this is the last part of this presentation. I'd like to focus more on the engagement and influence and impact of your research. Again, I'd like to point out you cannot take policy brief in a vacuum. You have to mix it with the different types of medium, okay, when trying to engage and push for the policy that you would like to influence. At EPDP, we had not only policy brief, we have brochures, newsletters, audio-visual production, social media accounts, especially now. It's very important that you have social media presence, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, because these are, especially Twitter, you have that character, right? So it's also a skill trying to tell your followers the findings of your study. So it's very difficult. Then you should not shy away from conferences because that's one way of disseminating your research. And you can also organize your own conference. So we had to organize this conference and invite not only experts here in the Philippines, but also those from abroad. And in this day and age, if you're not in the internet, you do not exist. So you've got to have web page. And at EPDP, we recognize that the project may end. So we had to populate also our reports in other URLs or in other web pages. And then you engage with the media. Media has a role, a very important role when you're trying to influence policy. When you're providing evidence, when you have media, the policymaker would also be at their toes on the choices that they will make because they will know that the media will pick it up. Okay, and and so from here, you towards then when you are already building up your research, you continue engage through writing opinion pieces, not only here in the Philippines, but you can also do it in venue international. Okay. And the last point that I'd like to point out is that policy reform is not a product of just one policy brief. So do not be naive that by writing one policy brief, we can influence policy. Be patient, be ready with frustrations. When I was participating in all those various meetings, committee hearings, technical working group, both at the Senate and at the House, I'm really getting frustrated because that it changes the composition, and they can also ask the same question over and over again. And one meeting you already agreed on some point, and then it will be asked again because that person did not attend the previous one. And so you have to be patient because that's how that you are trying to participate in the policy making process. Our experience with the Energy Institute, it was passed from 2017 to 2021. That was really very fast. Can you imagine the key policy reforms like the tarification of the rice industry and the Philippine Competition Act that took 2 decades from the time a bill was written before it finally became a law. So we have to keep that in mind, and let's not be naive that we will be shying away from the political economy. Keep in mind that the policymakers are not just crafting policies. They also deal with their own political dynamics and their own political survival. But for our part in the academe, we just keep on producing rigorous and credible research so that when the opportunity comes and the environment is ripe, we are ready and armed with scientific evidence that we built over the years. So as a final point, we really need the motivation for research, and I hope that you share this motivation. We need a heart for doing that research. It is our personal goal that we are cognizant of that the relevance of our work to the greater public, that we'd like to promote civil discourse through evidence and reason, and you're not making it as a cult that this is what you stand for, that we are trying to make the world a better place, in my case through economics. And as a parting word, let me share this with you, a quote from Joseph Campbell. Follow your bliss and the universe will open doors for you where there were only walls. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Ravago, for that very informative and inspiring talk. I know our audience are now excited to ask their questions. Please feel free to type in your questions for our speaker in the chat box, or you may click the raised hand button. Mention your name and institution before the question. So, shall we have the first question? By the way, it is understood that we only have 15 minutes question and answer for this talk. I am looking into the chat box. Our audience may also raise their hand to ask question to Professor Ravago. I see a lot of comments on the chat box. Thank you so much, Dr. Ravago. Very enlightening. So thank you for the comments. Anyone who would like to start to give the first question? Any brave soul? Yes, Dr. Celine.
Hi, Dr. Ravago. Many thanks for the meaty discussion. I learned a lot. No? Na-realize ko yung policy brief pala na pinasa namin sa KITAP, may mali kaming ginawa kasi our policy brief is 5 pages. I was looking at it now, sabi ko, okay, ganun pala dapat, no? So, hindi ko siya, at least now may ganun akong idea sa mga susunod na policy brief na isusulat namin in the future. I'm just curious if you're familiar with what they call policy articles. Kasi when I was looking for information about what policy brief is, a colleague mentioned that why not just write a policy article? Kasi yung policy article daw, it's indexed, it's published, or something like that. Pero kasi yung required sa amin, ma'am, is a policy brief. So what we did is a policy brief. So can we substitute a policy article over a brief instead, or may difference po ba yung dalawa? If you're familiar, ma'am, baka hindi rin familiar. Sorry.
Yeah, I think I know what you're referring to, although I'm not exactly sure. Again, it depends, no, on the purpose. Yung purpose kasi ng policy brief is you're trying to influence a policy. You're participating in a policy-making process. So, I don't know kung counted yon sa academe kasi ang very much counted, di ba, yung publication. So, yung policy article, merong mga like in the energy, yung sa mga energy journal, there is a energy policy. So typically hindi nila ina-accept kapag yung ang dami mong mga regressions, so sa economics yung ganon. So mas ina-accept nila yung merong policy implication, yung kumbaga hindi naman sobrang plain because they're still talking to an academe pero mas mahaba. So and then it's a published article, so index. So yon counted yon. Siyempre sa academe, di ba? Kina-count yung mga publication. So pero I don't know sa inyong university, di ba kina-count din yung extension work? So yung trying to influence policy, that's part of your extension work, not necessarily the brief. So kaya, and take note na mahirap ding magsulat ng policy brief. It's a skill din po. Kahit kami, nahihirapan. At mas matagal gawin yon because you're trying to distill and trying to make your research understandable. Because of our training, sometimes, or more often than not, it's easier for us to write our research findings, hindi po ba? Kasi na-train na tayo doon. So, ibang skill yung policy brief. Kaya ako din po ay shy away from just writing a brief na hindi ko naman inaral. Kasi mas lalong mahirap gawin yon. So, before I write a brief, it came from my particular research na nasulat ko na. Para mas madali. Because it's just distilling eh. So yun yun. So hindi talaga so, kung tinitingnan mo yung promotion, 'di ba binibilang yung output natin. hindi bilang yung policy brief. Iba kasi yung purpose niyan. Part yan ng ating extension work.
Thank you, Dr. Ravago. So yun nga po, no. Saka iba kasi siya pag article. Usually when you write an article, it's targeted to the people within the same field kasi.
Yes, specialized.
Unlike
so ito general eh.
Opo. Kasi yung mga senators halimbawa, syempre iba naman yung field nila. So yung language.
Yes.
Kasi parang babaguhin mo yung mindset mo. Doon ko siya na-realize nung nagsusulat ako. Parang paano ko ba siya ipapaintindi for somebody who is a non-expert dito? Parang gano'n.
Yes. And so that's why, di ba, ang general public yung ating target sa kahit na anong discipline tayo, dapat we are able to impart what we are trying to tell them. And then, especially now with the social media, no, ang pinaka-shorter version pa, so yung policy brief, 2-pager, di ba? And then, sabi ko nga kanina, minsan kumukuha pa kami ng somebody who's going to do the layout. Kasi kung plain lang siya, hindi rin yan babasahin. So, and then you're competing now with the social media infographics. And that's a different skill. So, ito yung mga 1-page lang. So, if you have the resources to do that, much better. So, yung infographics, ito yung maraming drawing, yung core message lang. So, typically 1-page lang yan, yung kitang-kita pag pinost mo sa Facebook. Diba? So, iba pa yon. Pero again, galing din yon sa policy brief, galing yun sa research nyo.
Thank you
so much. Yes, thank you so much, Doc Celine. Thank you so much, Professor Ravago. So we have another question on the chat box, Dr. Ravago. So it's from Norman Galabo of DepEd Davao City. Good afternoon po. Is one research enough for making a policy brief? Yun po, Dr.
Yes, yung pinakita kong example, di ba? Yung pinakita kong example yung isang research namin on natural gas, and then each of the research that we did in EPDP, it has an accompanying policy brief. So pwede naman. Again, in one policy brief, do not have this ambition that you are answering all the problems of the world. Just one policy question, it's better. And then you have that series. And then once you're building your research, sometimes ngayon, dahil marami na kaming nagawang research on this topic, I can write a policy brief na not necessarily coming from a particular research. Pero yun nga, matrabaho, di ba? And hindi nga counted sa ating output na binibilang ng university. So that's why for me, kapag susulat ako ng policy brief, gusto ko meron ng research paper.
Okay, so that's it. Thank you so much, Professor Ravago, for answering the question we also have another question here on the chat box, Professor Ravago, from Dr. Camille Visconde. Based on your experience, are there policymakers who would influence you in revising some parts of your research? How do you deal with it?
Yes, not necessarily policymakers. There are policymakers who may have a different opinion, right? But the one that we experienced was trying to influence what we wrote, or what we wrote based on the evidence that we have, another group. Okay, so what we tell them, this is based on evidence, and based on the methodology that we conducted. And we also tell them that we do not have the monopoly in writing a policy. Whatever they would like to pursue or push, they can always write that. And again, we're trying to influence policy by also promoting civil discourse through, in our case, economic reasoning. So that's what we tell them. Of course, especially contentious yung energy policy. We had that.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Ravago, for that smart answer. And of course, I see a hand raising a while ago, Ms. Rochelle Irene Lucas, but she is now actually lowering it down.
Sorry.
Yes, Ma'am Rochelle, you can now
another
raise your
meeting,
question.
sorry.
Yes po. You can now raise your
Dr.
question.
Rafago, good afternoon.
Hello.
So congratulations to your very enlightening talk. So I would just like to know if policy briefs are really intended to be enacted as laws in the future. So the policy briefs that are produced and have been more or less been given to our policy makers, our senators, our congressmen, are they really intended to be enacted as laws in the future? Thank you.
Well, because the intention is to influence policy, right? So you want to provide inputs, evidence to the policy making process. So the end goal is so that the laws of the land would be informed by evidence. So that's the intention.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have a follow-up question, Ma'am Rochelle? You can still have one follow-up question. Okay, I guess Ma'am Rochelle is having another meeting. So do you have another question for Professor Ravago before we proceed to the next part? Okay, so some of the comments are, thank you so much, Dr. Ravago, for such very interesting and full of wisdom talk. So I believe there are no more questions on the chat box, and nobody is now raising their hand. So thank you so much to all of our very active audience, and of course to our resource person, Professor Ravago, for patiently answering the questions raised. Indeed, this Policy Brief 101 has taught us a number of things: the nature, the 5W and 1H, and of course the structure of a policy brief. It should be brief from the word itself. And yeah, there are things to remember. We have to avoid jargons, use plain language in our policy brief, and at the same time use visuals, I mean. Okay, so those are my key takeaway, and I know you have yours. So at this juncture, we would like to present a certificate of appreciation to our resource person. So let me read the citation. Department of Science and Technology, National Research Council of the Philippines, Division 1, Governmental, Educational, and International Policies. Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Professor Mahalea V. Rabago in grateful acknowledgement of her distinguished and invaluable service rendered as speaker during the NRCP CCAP 6 webinar, Series 6, with the topic on Research Engagement and Dissemination, Policy Brief 101 on November 24, 2021 via Zoom. Signed, Dr. Maripaz E. Morales, Chair, NRCP Division 1. Okay, shall we give Dr. Rabago another round of applause? Thank you so much, Professor Rabago. So before we will proceed, thank you, Professor Rabago. Thank you po. So before we will proceed to the next topic, let us have a photo opportunity with our speaker because we believe that she has another meeting after her talk this